All right, good morning and welcome. I'm Dean Miller, the President and CEO of PACT, the Philadelphia Alliance for Capital and Technologies, and we're excited to present another SaaS Roundtable. A lot of people have been asking, certainly with the past year, are you going to continue to do things just in virtual practice? And we say, you know what? We might be doing a combo going forward. And certainly this is a great example because bringing together CEOs and executives from SaaS companies is something we want to continue to do. And you'll hear more from us certainly as the year progresses. But we are excited actually, and I'll announce it here if you haven't seen it. We are going to do an in-person Enterprise Awards celebration on June 29th at Springfield Country Club outdoors. We're expecting a great group of folks, so would be excited to see you there. I know there are a number of people here that are finalists and certainly past winners, so again, put that on your calendar, June 29th. We've got a great conversation here this morning. We're very thankful for so many supporters of our community, and our enterprise tech community, our SaaS community is on fire. We're going to hear about that a little bit this morning. But again, we've got some great supporters, including AB Bernstein, Boomi, Flexential, Cigniti, EisnerAmper, ORS Partners, SAP, and Troutman Pepper. And we're grateful for all of them. Also want to highlight that today is an event with ACG. It was yesterday and today, which is an event for SaaS companies that we're going to invite you to. There's a part of the program starting at 12:30 today. I'll come back at the end just to detail how to do that. You'll get a link as well. But without further ado, let me first just talk about a little bit of housekeeping. Attendees, please stay muted. We're in Zoom, again, as a roundtable discussion. Raise your hand to ask questions as we get into it. You can certainly use the chat feature to do that as well. And we'll go to about 9:35, and then we'll jump into Remo for some virtual networking. And if you haven't experienced that, it's a really natural face-to-face product that allows you per table to connect with your peers. So look forward to doing that. Without further ado, let me turn this over to Ian Robertson, who is the Global Director of Operations and Innovation at Boomi, not Dell Boomi, Boomi. Exciting news in the past month for what that company's achieved, among others. And again, just a real testament to the strength of our enterprise tech community. So welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks to PACT here for allowing us to come and talk about what's going on in this product-led space, and Heidi and team for pulling this together. My name's Ian Robertson. I look after growth initiatives, both for processes that we've outgrown and new value propositions that we bring to our customers and to our employees at Boomi.
I'm Mahe, CEO, co-founder of Phenom People. I work on a ton on product. That's pretty much where I spend most of the time.
Hey everyone, my name is Rick Nucci. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Guru, and prior to Guru was the founder of Boomi.
All right, thank you, Mahe. Thank you, Rick. So to tee this up a bit today, I'd like to give a premise on this conversation that the pace of our business is getting faster every day because consumers are used to having their needs met ASAP, that with a single click, we can get anything we want, and we expect to get it right away. And if one company can't deliver, we would turn to a competitor who would. And that delivering on these increasing customer expectations while outmaneuvering competitors is putting a lot of pressure on everyone in the organization. Everyone from executives to HR, right, Mahe? To finance, to sales, right, Rick? And marketing, to IT teams and partners and suppliers. They need to get the right data at the right time so they can take actions to get immediate results. So Thursday at Boomi, we went GA with a new offering to speed up the sales cycle, a product-led offering. And we decided to use Boomi to innovate Boomi, to quickly unite everything in the digital ecosystem so we could achieve better outcomes faster. Using Boomi's intelligent, flexible, scalable platform, it accelerated our business results by making it faster and easier to link data and systems to applications and processes and to people. All three of us here deal with data and are working to create these types of outcomes, each in our own spaces. So today we're going to dig into that and look at how we can navigate this transition from a purely sales-led to maybe a hybrid sales-led plus product-led, and all of the hurdles and tactics that come into that transition. And then we'll spend some time in the second half figuring out how we identify that end user buyer, because the end user buyer might be wildly different from the buyer today, and understand the hurdles that we face as we go through that. Before we get started, Rick, Mahe, do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, one thing I'll say is like a product-led growth is a very interesting infrastructure which has got built in the last couple of years, and there are a lot of super successful companies. But like what we have seen is, from where we sit, there are a lot of things which we were able to do, and there are a lot of things which we thought like we shouldn't do. But I'll give both the perspectives from where I come from and where the context matters and your buyer do matter in terms of product-led growth.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I think we have evolved our thinking on our go-to-market broadly. And so I'm excited to chat, because I think some of the questions and some of the way they were framed around transitioning to, that kind of thing, are things we went through, in some cases painfully. So definitely happy to share the learnings.
Right on. So let's jump in and begin at the beginning. How do you decide to even introduce a product-led motion? Rick, talk to us a bit about the starting point of that journey for you.
For sure, yeah. I think the very first thing, I think, as you were nicely setting it up, Ian, I do tend to agree that there's a shift or a tilt towards product-led, broadly speaking. And what I mean by that is that I think more and more businesses are going to continue to come to market and evolve that are going to be built with this kind of distribution model in mind, right? How do you, we always define this as like, what role does your product play, the usage of your product in the acquisition, expansion, retention of your customers, right? So the non-human parts of the experience, basically. So I do think that's where a lot of things are headed. But I think a huge caveat there, and I think to get to answer your question directly, I think there's and it sounded like some of this was coming out in what Mahe was setting up, like one size doesn't fit all. And, I think it starts with like the market and the product. What size companies roughly are you selling to is a good example of a dimension that has a huge ramification on, in some ways forcing your hand, right? If you're MailChimp and your strategy is to sell to, 100,000 customers paying you $1,000 a year, you're product led. That's your only way to do it, right? There's not a sustainable cost model where you could have humans involved in that kind of loop. Conversely, if you're Workday and you're selling, $1 million licenses to 1,000 companies, right? And these are long, complex decision-making processes, right? Product-led is, not necessarily going to work, right? So I think for us, we looked at that dimensionality a lot. We're probably, not probably, if you look at our data today, are like, building for this kind of like 10,000 customers paying you $10,000 a year, which is interesting because it does have certain implications on what we do and don't do from a go-to-market. But like looking at that, understanding our market, our product, the problem it solves, the nature of how we land within a team and then expand across a company, for us made product-led a really, really good fit in terms of how we could best serve our customers.
Thanks, Rick. I think we've been thinking some similar things, that idea of getting started on a small use case or a small team or a single business unit, and then using it as a foot in the door to create champions within an organization to expand over time. Mahe, do you want to talk a bit about your journey to understanding product led?
So we started in Growth Hack first. So we created a team called as a Product Excellency team, which is a purely data-driven product team. They're basically watching out every user, what their frequency is, what their depth of usage is, which particular features they're using, like when are we losing, what are the segments we are really going after, which was not to really build a product-led growth, but to really have an extensive thought process towards what user is doing. That's where we started. And we built that team like in parallel with the product team, and they are equal in number. For every product, you have an excellence manager who's just really driven to really look at like what the user is doing. And what happened in the middle of COVID was, like when the COVID started, what we thought is our average deal size is over 200K. So we are enterprise led and sales led growth motion. That's what we really do. So at that point of time, we thought we should condense, because people cannot buy the market segmented into multiple pieces. There are pieces where it's growing, there are pieces where it's stagnant, there are pieces where it's completely fall off. So what we thought is, how can we really take the 2/3 of the equation where the market is stagnant or the market is really hurting? Can we really create a product which is simple enough and nimble enough, and you can really do only one slice for their need at that particular hour? And that's where we really built a product-led motion. And what we did is, well, there are two techniques what we used. One is, can we really give this to our own existing customers? So it's an upsell growth opportunity. Most of the larger enterprise ticket item companies actually focused on upsell in a product-led growth infrastructure. Because you have, like, if you really take our client base, we have over close to 400 companies who use our product. But if you look at like what they're really doing, they all have different needs based on where the industry is sitting. So we thought, like, we created a bunch of product lines, and then we really went after it. That gave us a very unique edge of what to acquire. So which was a byproduct of what we did, which is very interesting notion, because we saw what user is using, which particular area where our features are weak, which particular areas where we can really add, and then what to bring in. But that really came down because we only sell to companies about 1,000 employees. We don't sell below that, because HR operates below 1,000 differently and above 1,000 differently. Once you are a 1,000 employee company, you are recognized differently, and your cost of bringing talent on, or the time to bring talent on, will reduce just because of your brand. So, so those are the motions what we really did, and that's how we got into product led.
Awesome, Mahe, thank you. So just to put a fine point on that, we're talking about two very different approaches here between what Rick's talking about and what Mahe's talking about. Rick's looking at this as, hey, the end user, a small team, they can get started on a small use case. Whereas Mahe's saying, you got to get into the enterprise first, and then the product led becomes an upsell motion to folks who are already in the platform. And these are two different approaches, and it's just really exciting to have both of your points of view here. I wanted to latch on to one other thing you said, Mahe, was about the growth team. This is a really popular topic today as we look at our industry, growth teams, growth hacking teams. Can you talk us a little bit more about who's on that team? You mentioned that they sit parallel to a product team, but who do you bring on there, and how do you form that team?
So there are multiple philosophies in growth teams. Like, do growth team has complete like set of people, like where developers are included? Initial version for us was a growth team is pretty much only a team of a couple of analysts who really can play with data, and people with product experience. So those are the two primary notions what we took. And then we also added user experience as the time passed by. Now, what we are doing is, for a scale products, which has more than probably 100 customers at the minimum, because we have 4 different products which we sell, but it's one single notion. Or use case is an end-to-end use case. So we basically there are 2 products where we can really deploy a growth team, which is basically sitting with a couple of full stack developers, JavaScript developers, UX, the product growth team, and also the analytics team. Together, we really form a team which basically go after. But every product won't have the same notion, because product maturity do matter. Because for us, what values an enterprise really look at, like when looking at Phenom, is what is the end-to-end we do? They don't care about how many leads came in. They only care about how many people got hired. So, but the process is a very long process. The budget is allocated on how many people got hired. Even though you have 20 steps in between, each step is not really recognized as value in a C-level, what do you call, a thought process or a boardroom.
Thanks, Mahe. And then, Rick, how are you using growth hacking teams at Guru?
Yeah, so we have two teams. The first team is on the product side, and they consist of a product manager, a few product managers, design lead, analyst, engineers, and they are responsible for the onboarding experience, what we call the self-service experience, and the monetization side, so pricing and packaging. And pricing, so monetization would be like the shopping cart experience of how you convert into a paid plan in Guru, how you change your subscription, add users, those kinds of things. And the metrics that matter for those teams is on self-service, it's activation. And so activation for us is, what are the set of product behaviors that our users are doing that signal likelihood of conversion, or depending on the size of the company, readiness to talk to a salesperson. So that's sort of activated, and that's, everything they're doing is running experiments to move the needle on that. And monetization team is paid conversion. So what percentage of teams that sign up and get into the product go on and convert. And so they're talking about the pricing and packaging. Then, so you sort of think of that team as like, from the moment someone goes from our website into the product, they're sort of like that part of the experience. And then the growth team on our marketing side is effectively SEO, paid search, messaging, positioning, everything up to converting into the product. And so they're thinking about how do we intersect our product and our marketing strategy. And as like a really quick example of that, a lot of the things our customers struggle with in our product is, how to get started. And so we put a ton of energy into templates that could range from, how do I, how do I teach someone how to file an expense report, or what are templates to help me introduce change management into my company, to internal comms templates, on and on and on and on. And so a lot of our users will use these to get started, and they're actually built by our customers, and then our customers share them, and then we use those. But our growth team on the marketing side is taking those templates, and effectively that becomes a big part of their SEO strategy. And so, you think about people who, the phrases like knowledge management aren't mainstream phrases, right? And so I don't think people are waking up every day going, I have a knowledge management problem. But what people are often searching for is a lot of those examples I said, right? And so we put a ton of time into how to connect those sort of long tail searches into that, and that team is really responsible for that, that part of the funnel.
Fantastic, thanks for that. And I love the points from both of you about how those metrics are very important, and that it really can start to break down silos within an organization as you get people thinking about metrics that are either upstream of where they normally are or downstream and aligned on that. Rick, there was a question coming in here asking for a little bit of clarification, that your comment on how you're using product-led versus how Mahe is actually suggesting that the enterprise requires a different approach that might not be product-led. Is that what you're Can you clarify that a bit more, please?
Sure. Yeah. So for us, I really appreciate the question, and we spent a lot of time on this. For us, product-led plays an enormous role for us across all of our segments, but it is very different in enterprise, and really for us over kind of 500 employees is where we see this. And the biggest difference is the user of the product, the person who comes in and creates their Guru account, starts setting up content and documentation and knowledge in Guru and start sharing it with their team, actually is not the buyer. They're actually two different people. They're two different personas. And so what happens with the bigger companies is, almost imagine it as kind of a parallel track where, there's a team. We have a team called a product specialist team, which I'm happy to share more about, the awesome stuff they do around like, how do you get people that are in the product, successful in the product kind of thing on the onboarding side. And they're working with that, but in parallel, when that team activates, back to my earlier metric, that signals to the AE to in parallel begin partnering with that person to effectively build the business case up to the decision maker. And that motion is, I would say a good example of my point of like not one size fits all. We learned that the hard way just by like really trying to understand the behavior of our customers. But when it works well, in other words, when you get the person using the product bought in, excited, they become your champion. They become your partner in building the business case. So then the AE is working with them and going like, okay, I'm going to feed you everything I can, case studies, metrics on adoption of how it's going with the product, everything I can give you so that when you're sitting down with the VP of support or VP of sales, or we have different personas who end up paying for the product, you're having a great conversation. So, you were describing it as like hybrid earlier, Ian, and I think that's the biggest thing. It doesn't become sales led with the bigger companies, but that parallel path I talked about, I think really is this kind of hybrid version where the product plays a critical role, but that we don't think there's any way for our product and market that we'd make our customers successful without the AE, the customer success manager, the account manager. These roles become critical for those bigger companies to see success.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're kind of jumping into this next part, so let's just roll with this and dig into how we identify that end user, the end user buyer, how these personas are different. Mahe, you mentioned earlier that you spent a lot of time trying to figure this out using the platform, the data that you're able to capture on customers' interaction with the platform to understand their interactions with the product. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about what data were you looking for to really understand how the end user is interacting with the product?
Yeah, let me give you, if you really look at like a Phenom sells talent experience management. It has 4 different products within the platform. The first one is the candidate experience. We have over 300 million people use our product across the globe. You're talking about numbers which are outrageous, because we have over 1.5 million jobs sit on the product. So it has a different velocity in terms of how people really come in yearly. And then if you look at our recruiter base, which is the recruiter experience, there we have over 40,000 people use our product. And then we have an employee experience. We have around close to 5 million people. And then we have a manager experience. That's about 40,000. But here is the point. The frequency of the user is entirely different. So what is the frequency is the most important thing. If the frequency is high, you can really build a product-led growth much more effectively. So in our case, a recruiter side of the equation, they use our product every day, minimum 6 to 8 hours, because we are the front and center of the product. We are on average, without our product, they cannot recruit. Whereas an employee don't come every day. Only if there is an event where they want to grow within the company or refer somebody or want to learn something, there is a notion. Whereas a candidate, only if they don't have a job or they're looking for a new job. So each motion within a product is entirely different. So when when we are deploying the product-led growth, we're looking at what is our frequency of usage, depth of usage, and breadth of usage. Based on that, what technique you implement is different. So now for that's what is a user. A lot of times what happens is the buyer is who is really coming in to try the product so that the users can use the product. Like in Shopify case, this happens. But the point what we really thought about is we sell to companies which are really larger. Value recognition is one of the most important criteria what product-led growth really did. How fast you can really give value to the end user and to the enterprise effectively. And that is it's not the business model actually. It's about how fast the value is realized. You're not waiting for a QBR or an yearly, like a, what do you call as meeting, which is basically saying like how the business review is, but you're really giving instantaneously what's the value you're adding. That's what actually made us really think through uniquely. But also our customer base, like the buyer and the user, they sit in a, like our buyer don't even know our candidates. Like one of the persona what I'm talking about is a candidate. They don't know the candidates that effectively, even though they're in the HR space, because they never really looked at that data from that angle. So it's all about like conversion in terms of usage on multiple levels. And then how do you really funnel that end to end?
That's great. It's just a different metric from, I'd say, some of our more traditional segmentation approaches, maybe based on industry or company size, things like that. It's super insightful. Rick, how are you looking at these end user interactions with the product or other approaches to segmenting users to understand behavioral patterns?
Yeah, totally. So we have I'll give a quick sort of like journey of like how, like what we were doing and what we learned from it. But effectively there was a time at Guru where we were really deep into selling to customer facing teams. By that, I mean sales teams and support teams. And we still land there today. And that's a very common buyer persona for Guru. But as we started taking a more data-driven approach to understanding our users, to your question, one of the things we did very simply is we just ask everybody their role in the product, right? So when you're onboarding or when you set up your preferences, we just broadly ask you, are you in, sales support? Are you a manager? Are you in HR, et cetera? And the phenomenal learning was like we had gotten it totally wrong in that actually our number one, our buyers were actually spread kind of like all over the place, which is an interesting challenge, but I'll talk about how we kind of reconciled that. And then the other big learning was the developer persona, which if you had gone to our website, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, you would never think that Guru was built for or intended to be used by developers, yet it was our third biggest role users in the product. And so we sort of like digested all of that. And effectively what we realized is instead of having a persona-led go-to-market where, Mahe's just did a wonderful job explaining why persona-led go-to-market is, of course, what they would do and the way they're positioning their value prop. They have a very clear buyer. In our case, because we have lots of different people who sort of feel the pain, we ended up moving to a jobs to be done framework, which is much more about connecting use cases that have broad, interest or value or need across all these different buyers. And then connecting the outcomes, that come from them. So a good example of that would be employee onboarding, where, Guru plays a big role in how to set up an onboarding experience for new employees that is more self-service driven, not solely self-service, but as you join a new company, imagine just being able to curate and digest a whole bunch of stuff about the company. So then as you're meeting people live, you're having much more, productive, useful conversations. They're like, okay, well, that matters to every team. Every team hires and onboards developers, sales teams, support teams. So that's a good example of that learning and how we use that data to make the the decision. But then the other thing I would say about that, the final point is about that user persona is going back to my hybrid example before for the bigger companies. That's where I think our team, our enterprise team, has done an amazing job in connecting Guru to outcomes and value. And that's where understanding what team you've landed in and who's buying it for that particular customer or example totally changes the way you'll frame that, outcome value conversation. If we're talking to a support team, they're going to be caring about, of course, like everyone, how quickly can I get a new hire agent into the queue solving tickets, but they're also going to care about like response time, CSAT, handle time, metrics like that. And so what our team does is helps connect the usage of Guru to improvements of those metrics, right? And that's, I think, the hard part, but the really amazing thing, and you can figure it out when I was talking about that parallel path. The sales team's doing a ton of that work, helping the customer, the champion, with that knowledge and information, so that they can help connect Guru to those outcomes. So it was hugely impressed with our team, who really led a lot of the learnings that I just talked about and jobs to be done and flipping to use case centered, positioning. But I think it was just a really fascinating thing to see how it evolved for us, because we just sort of got a bunch of things wrong as we were looking at the data. But it was a great, it was a very thoughtful approach to how to actually position the product to be able to better connect with future customers.
That's a great point. I feel like we on the Boomi side are certainly thinking about that job to be done, but are finding it's hard to know. It's hard to really get there. Like how do you really know? So then that would be as a quick follow-up question for you. How do you know that new employee onboarding is one of those jobs to be done that's going to resonate with future buyers?
Yeah. Lots and lots and lots of qualitative conversations. And one thing I would say, we use a product called Chorus. And there's what Chorus basically does is join your calls, your sales calls and your customer success calls, and records them and transcribes them. And so, our product marketing team just spends a huge amount of time listening to, digesting, categorizing, effectively all those conversations. You can also do really cool things in this product, like set up what they call trackers. And so, it seems like onboarding keeps coming up. You can put a tracker, and then when Chorus hears the person say it sends a thing, and then you go listen to that call, right? So lots and lots of qualitative. We're starting now to also ask you, as we built confidence in what our primary use cases are, asking our customers to identify what use case they want to solve. But what I'm talking about is like before any of that, it's just this dedication to win reviews and loss reviews. And you just see it every month. Our product marketing team goes into our sales channel in Slack, and they're like, okay, we want to do 3 wins and 3 losses. Please nominate, someone. And then they start asking that calls, and that, Ian, is really where we sort of were like, okay, these 3 keep coming up: employee onboarding, product enablement, internal communication. These are the 3 things we keep hearing over and over again. And then that turned into basically the foundation of our positioning strategy. Awesome.
Thanks for that. That's great. So Mahe, maybe as we continue on this understanding of the user, who would you say your best user is today? Who's that ideal user for Phenom today? And then who would you want it to be in the future?
Yeah, so here is a point, right? Like we in the whole talent life cycle, there are 4 stakeholders: candidate, recruiter, employer, employee, and a manager. If you take one, it won't work. It's actually a 4-sided network. So we wantedly played the game from starting. We went in for a candidate experience to starting product, but that's not the product we want to build. Because if all the 4 sides don't work, our value prop as an experience at the end of the day has to do 2 things. One is, how do we personalize The second one is, how do we automate? You do personalization at scale, and you do automation where you can really effectively replace stuff where people don't need to do it. If we don't do those two things, at the end of the day, time to hire won't reduce. So we are not really looking at these personas because they're selling motions. It's not. The end result will come only if I have all the 4 data sets. Like, let me give you an example. Based on which candidate fits a job is determined by how many employees you have in that particular job. That's a direct correlation. And what type of manager who is hiring these people. That is the data set what you need to work on. So our intention is each user has a different frequency and each user gives a different data insight, which is valuable to us to learn. And I didn't learn this because of this business. I actually built a business before, which is a complete failure. And that's where I learned like a multi-sided network in terms of collecting data. And end of the day, well, I'll give an example. On the employee experience, people buy our product for the first two, the candidate experience and the recruiter experience. On the employee experience, we created a product line on the top, which is, what is your company's career progression? Which areas your company is growing, which area your company is shrinking? Which departments needs more power, which departments you don't need to care much about because they're not really growing at all. We created a tool called as Enterprise Career Framework tool. It's given for free. And it gives insights they have never seen in their life. And the reason is because of the data sets what we already have. And now what happens is that basically gives a motion for selling EX. Because that tool itself is part of setting up the onboarding experience of how we deploy our EX product. But the tool gives like people to play with it. And these are big companies. You are talking about like 400,000 employee companies and all that stuff. And when they see that, which they always really look at an Excel sheet, they have never seen it. They just naturally get confidence on buying the product. That motion is very important. But to really create that enterprise career framework, if you don't have the tool inside the product, you cannot create because it's complete AI and graph infrastructure. It has a heavy lift. And you have to really build models at an industry level. So that's where, but you have a high price point, like nobody did this. Like you can really build a very large infrastructure, especially the companies which are right now in a very complex business models.
All right. And then similar, I guess, for Rick here, the user today and the user tomorrow, where do you see that going and how is it going to change?
Totally, yeah. I was talking before about our evolution from customer-facing focus to a product that's being used company-wide, which is much more of where I think we're heading. And in some of our segments have been there all along. And like I was saying, just didn't realize that's how our customers were using it. So I'll sort of speak to that in a future state. I mean, as you were describing our motion earlier, Ian, is like sort of like land with a small team and expand. That's absolutely the motion across all of our segments. And so for us, that means that we might start with a small 10, 20 person team, and then in a few years become, a 10,000 person, seat license for a bigger company. And so I think the most interesting thing about that is if you then step back and go, well, what does it mean to our company and our product strategy to evolve from being an awesome, product for support teams, as I was saying, to a product that's used by an entire company. I talked about the use case positioning as the first example of that, is like, are people using your product in a way that is spread? But the second biggest one that I think connects a lot to today's conversation around product-led growth is the distribution strategy. For our type of product, there's often one of them, and don't maybe not overly literally take that. Like, yes, people are always going to use Dropbox and Google Docs and lots of ways to document and take notes and all of those things. I'm sort of talking about like the one source of truth for company knowledge. There's typically one that with a customer is successful with Guru, the leadership saying like, this is the place to put that information, and Guru makes sure it doesn't go stale and all that stuff. Well, if you sort of flip your thinking to that mindset and say, okay, there's only one of these and it's used by the entire company, all of a sudden a product-led distribution strategy becomes, really, really critical when again, in our case, for both of those ingredients to work. And I would almost argue that it's as important as the product and how the product is differentiated. And what I mean by that is, I think that I talked about land and expand for Guru, and that's our motion. At the end of the day, we're a collaboration product that is connecting people seeking knowledge with people who have expertise that they want to share or need to share, so that people stop shoulder tapping them constantly. And so, in that kind of pattern, if you're landing with a small team, the product has to play a huge role in how it expands. And so, just like product-led growth is tuned towards a highly scalable self-service type acquisition machine, customer acquisition machine, I think it also is just as important, depending on the nature of the product and the category, in product-led expansion. And what are the ways that usage of the product can facilitate and naturally, organically spread the product across the company. And so that's the, your question of like where we want to be is, we think there's just a ton of opportunity in ways that we can very naturally help Guru spread across the company, and actually like facilitate that to happen, and introduce Guru to new teams within a company before we actually ask them to pay for it, right? And that's, I think, the biggest difference with what I'm talking about is like, how can you actually show value first before you actually, invoice someone because a new seat joined. And so I'd say that's a big part of the answer to, how we're thinking about evolving that, what it means to go from a departmental use product to something used by an entire company.
Got it. I'm taking notes. I'm trying to moderate. I'm listening. This is a really. I'm so grateful for the both of you guys for being here. This is awesome. So let's shift just a little bit and get from this. So now we're really looking in at how people are using the platform. We're talking about where we want to go, and this topic of experimentation comes in very much. Of okay, we think we know what the best way is to make those motions, but we don't know. So Mahe, talk a little bit about how you can experiment on the fringe with the product to create those new experiences, to drive those new outcomes, and to get those KPIs that you've been talking about.
Yep. So there are two methods to really run this. One is you are really building a new product, or you're really enhancing the existing product experience, whether it's onboarding or really making sure you create product bumpers or conversational bumpers so that the product usage and onboarding and adoption becomes higher. So that's one technique which we basically really look at, like how the product onboarding can be simplified, like how can you really create templates, and how can you really write for those templates all the blogs about like the content creation and all that, which Rick was mentioning. The second segment is we always think about like what products we can build for the product-led expansion. Like diversity and inclusion is one product we built because it was a very important topic and most of the people don't know how to use the data. So we gave that product for almost every customer of ours for free, use it. And as you really, the utilization grows, then you pay for it. The same thing we really deployed for a different notion, which is for essential workers, we created a package, how to hire essential workers end to end. And we used to really go for giving that package for, they did not pay for anything, it's just really deploy. Now we created a frontline worker product completely end to end. So we started really making products industry specific. Because the way you hire in a Starbucks and the way you hire in Microsoft is not, it's day and night. Because the industry don't match, like the data don't match, nothing matches. So how do you really give that level of end-to-end cycle is where we are really innovating a lot in terms of how can we can give a product for free for a couple of stores, and then they can start with it. We did that with a bunch of companies, and that really gave us a lot of leverage in terms of upsells and cross sells. But the initial product is almost pilot. They need not pay for it.
Awesome, thank you. And then Rick, for you at Guru, how are you using experimentation to find those new value propositions and test things out and learn?
Yeah, totally. That I would say one of the biggest things I've seen happen over 2020 is we brought in a lot of expertise that I have learned just a ton from that have this mindset and skill set. And so like, I'll give a few quick examples, like the website, the homepage, some of our use case specific pages, our pricing pages. We will freely experiment and test different iterations and versions, and do typical A/B testing to be able to have confidence in what we're doing being right. And I think one of the things we find with that approach is it actually speeds up the decision-making process of like, what should the message be? Well, you can kind of like release that pressure valve if it's like, well, let's just try these two versions and see which one performs better, versus the like endless, whiteboard debate. The ones that I think are harder to do but have been, really, really insightful are around the we've done pricing and packaging experiments, and we've done onboarding experience. With pricing and packaging, we've done experiments where we want to test a new, packaging or price point, or, a different kind of user role in the product. And so we've actually built that, experiment infrastructure into the product itself, which, took time and was a commitment and investment that we had to make. But again, and back to, product-led growth, the human is out of the loop so much that if you are committed to that strategy and you want to learn, you've got to invest in that experimentation infrastructure, because, while you can have those qualitative conversations for things like how you use the product, there's a lot of things that you just can't at scale. And so, for us, it was I think the leaders we brought in that believed a lot in it. And like, I think looking back, really glad we made the investments. And so that experiment infrastructure going to products, like, okay, so, if you have a control group that's got today's, pricing and packaging, and then you've got a variant coming into the product that's got an experiment we're running with a different kind of user license, let's say. And then by doing it that way, and then sending 50% of your people into the control, 50% into the variant, you can look at those now as two different cohorts. And so you can see how they behave over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, however long, the more you get, the faster you can get, relevant, experimentation results. But however long it might be, you can watch those behaviors. And so for things where like the cost of getting it wrong is really high, right? Like if you, and I've lived through making a pricing change that was wrong and saw how that negatively impacted our business. And so those can be really expensive changes to introduce to the business. That type of experimentation does a huge de-risk on, the ability to see what the real behavior is going to be. Do people convert faster? Do they expand faster? Do they add more users faster? Whatever the metrics are that you have your experiment connected to. So it's been, I think like as a result of doing a few of these now, I think Guru is becoming like culturally much more experimentally driven and learn and grow. And again, it's not a, everything's an experiment hammer, because again, it takes time, it's expensive. So you can actually run experiments that really just can slow you down, honestly. So it does require, I think, thoughtfulness, but for the right things, I think it's been phenomenally impactful to, how we can freely try things, not focus as much on, is this right or is this wrong? And this is an experiment, let's try it, let's learn. And that shift in thinking, I think, has really been huge for us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, and absolutely resonates with how we're looking at it right now at Boomi, building out that experimentation, and not just A/B testing the website, but marketing, the emails that are being sent out, and trying to refine that to a point, right? You can get it only but so far, and then you've got to keep going and looking somewhere else. So absolutely resonates. Now, you are also touching on the where does this come from? How are you governing it? And I think for both of you in the roles that you have, certainly a level of sponsorship in your seats is about as high as you get. But in some organizations, there's more of an organic growth to bringing product-led and experimentation into the way that folks are doing their day-to-day job. Have you experienced people who are doing that bottoms-up approach, who are really looking to push in this new direction, and versus what you see, the vision that you're setting down for, say, experimentation into the culture of just how teams work? And what do you do when you've got somebody who's coming in saying, I think we should start experimenting here, or I think we should start doing product-led for this segment or this market, and maybe that's disruptive to the vision that you're setting out? Mahe, how do you handle that, or have you encountered that in your business?
It all depends on the tooling infrastructure. What you use really gives the determination about, like, the decision need not be the top down or bottom up, wherever it makes sense. So if we really, like, as Rick said, like, we are using Gong, we basically use for the same purpose. We listen to where the cues are, and then we really use Pendo. We basically look at, like, okay, what's the data, which is onboarding side, like what the issues we can really fix. Then we also use, like, full story in the backend. Then we have our own analytics infrastructure. Then we have experimentation, which we do A/B testing. But a layer below A/B testing, we also really do what you call as multi-arm bandits, which we really build the infrastructure, which model will work where. And you're not really changing only the UI, you're even changing the model behind it, the AI model, what you deployed, based on what segment is used. So we created in the product something called as audiences. So when you really log into our product, there is a dashboard. The dashboard is completely personalized based on who the person is. And we constantly play with how the dashboard has to be restructured by the user. And the fundamental point what we do is, for the usage where the user is having a very high usage, we create something called as a taste graph for the user. For a recruiter, we create a taste graph and constantly really look at, because we have frequency, and based on that, the experimentation actually runs. So the data is determined like by all the tools, and then who really runs an experiment is all depends at a local level. It need not be top down or any other approach there.
Okay, great. And then I'm thinking a little bit more about the folks within your company trying to bring these changes up. How do you foster an environment where you've got, front end workers, boots on the ground, who are bringing information, ideas about something as transformational as introducing a new sales motion?
Yeah, customer success plays a humongous role in this. Account managers plays a humongous role, because they have a customer facing thought process in terms of what's working. But in the back end, we have a product growth teams, which are constantly looking at the data sets too. So, like, even support really comes up with ideas, because I'm getting, like, we really do this support triages, and we really look at, like, okay, we get, like, let's say 1,000 tickets, how tickets are really formed, and which particular experiment will help a particular ticket to reduce. And we did, like, a lot of those experiments from just support tickets itself. And that actually yield the onboarding and the product experience a lot better.
Got it. And Rick, how about for you and your organization, this bottoms up versus tops down to the transformation approach? I mean, we're hearing you talk about the programs you're supporting, the things that have come through. Is that coming from you? Is it coming organically? Are there things you said no to?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll speak a little bit to the some of the higher level things that I think we went through in that. To complement some of what Mahe was saying, like, I think one really good example is, like, if you've built a business and you have a motion where you get the adrenaline hit of the high 6-figure, 7-figure deal, and that's what you ring the gong when the deal closes, and it's sort of the big win, right? Like, it can be. I think it takes a ton, maybe even board level, kind of like commitment to go, like, okay, we got to revisit that, because, if the strategy is, hey, today we're selling going back to my animals, right? Are we doing whales or mice, right? If today we're selling 1,000 customers paying us $1 million a year. Oh, hey, what if we, introduce this offering that where we're selling to SMBs and they'll probably pay us $1,000 a year. There's a bunch of zeros off that, and people are going to sort of like it's a big cultural shift, right? And it really just is. And we go through that and have gone through that at Guru. We had a more pronounced version of that a few years ago, where the customers were coming in and landing at 100K plus often, and then kind of expanding from there. And now it's really smoothed out, and you see a lot more. I described it as 10,000 customers paying $10,000 a year as like where we see our biggest segment of growth. We call those like deer, like kind of in the middle of the animal sizes in my spectrum there. And so so we thought of it as, effectively, a checklist of like a couple of things to say, like, should we be doing this, to your point? And so I just talked about the target market, and I think that's the first one, right? Like if you're mice hunting, you're doing product led, right? You cannot have humans in the loop in that kind of motion. It's just not going to work from a cost and scale perspective. So that's sort of like just, disqualifier one. But I think some other things on the checklist that we went through, the next one I'll call sort of like fit or ease of use. Is your product such that someone can self-intuit how to set it up, turn it on, and get initial value from it? And, Slack is an example most people know of being, really, really great at this, or the product we're using right now, setting it up and getting value is like starting a meeting and talking to someone. Oh, cool. Oh, actually, like Zoom meetings don't drop or have lag. That's handy, and so the value is quick, fast, and apparent. So that's sort of like fit and intuition. And then the other one I would talk about is like how many people within a company have to use it in order to get value? Is it something where you can have a single person, a single player mode of your product, where, Mahe talked about that example of something that Dave introduced that gives this great introduction to their product where like one person can use it and get value. That's phenomenal, right? Because it just simplifies the friction of introducing your product into a company. So I think that's another part of the checklist. But I think you sort of go through all those things and you're like, here's the market we want to go after. Here's the product we think we need to build. Here's the likelihood through those, and there's probably 6 or 7 more of those dimensions I think you look at, and you sort of slide yourself on the scale of like, that can happen, or yeah, that really won't work in a self-service experience. And then you almost have this like grade. And I think that's, that kind of makes it a little bit more objective to go like, hey, should we really do this? And we went through that exact exercise at Guru to get to our answer, and felt like, if you looked at our dials, some of them are kind of in the middle, some of them are all the way to the self-serve, some of them are pretty far on the left, right? And that then became how we designed a lot of our go-to-market and our teams, and how we kind of set up our organization to make our customers successful.
Thanks for that. And yeah, that idea of working through detractors and the massive change of thinking of, let's get 1,000 at 1 million versus 1 million at 1,000 is certainly disruptive. We're coming close to the end here, and I want to make sure that we get some closing thoughts for the folks who are on the call, people leaders, business leaders, frontline workers on the call. So what would your recommendations be for introducing a new motion like this, for coming up with this product-led motion? Seeing if someone sees that today, how do they have their voice heard, gain the right sponsorship, and go after it? I know you were talking about market fit, ease of use, time to value, the number of users needed to be able to get to that value. Any other thoughts about the organizational, the selling, the internal, that part of it that might help them be successful in introducing product-led in their businesses? Mahe, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. Yeah. So if you really look at don't think product-led growth as a philosophy, what is written on in books. That's not what is important. Because if an MBA can really build a business, then every entrepreneur should be a guy who did an MBA. That's what's written in books is not what translates. So they don't really take product-led by perspective about it should be a particular thesis about hey, this is how the sales motion should be. You take the gist of the common concepts of what it is trying to teach, and how do you apply in your context in an effective format based on where your business is a very important trajectory every entrepreneur has to think through. If you don't think from that angle, and if you really follow like, oh, this is what is product-led growth, this is what, like, then you're doing a physics exercise rather than really building a business.
Awesome. Yeah. And Rick, do you want to respond too?
Yeah, I'm gonna huge +1 that because I think that was phenomenally said, and it just makes me think of like in the early Boomi days, like 2006, 2007, when we were like making our bet on rebuilding that product and platform to be a true cloud native. Much like the rhetoric and the writing and the hype around PLG, exactly as Mahe was just saying, is very real, and it can be tempting to go like, oh yeah, we're going to do that. It is so contextual to your business, and you heard how different our respective approaches are, but no business is the same, I would argue, right? And so I think Mahe said it really elegantly of like, look at those common threads, but then really go like, we got to write our own playbook here. Be very, very careful thinking you can sort of drop in something that worked for Atlassian or Slack or Shopify or Zoom and assume it'll kind of work here. And that was very much, back to my cloud point, like everybody was going like, cloud, we got to be cloud. We're going to be cloud. We're going to be cloud. But like most people were literally just doing it because it had hype, right? They weren't actually going like, well, why do multi-tenancy? Like some of these like real actual hard engineering problems that like, if you really figure them out, you'll actually get the benefit, right? And like in those days, in the Boomi days, a lot of our competitors were like, we're cloud now. And they just sort of took their existing stuff and they put it in in another person's data center and said, okay, now it's cloud, right? But like because Boomi really built it natively from the ground up, they were able to really reap the benefits of what it means to be cloud. And I think the exact same story plays out in product led. I think the distribution strategy product led affords is amazing and transformational, and in many ways where a lot of things are going. But man, it'll be so different from company to company. And I think the businesses that take the time to really, just like Mahe said, really go like, what's our playbook? Because it's not going to be theirs or theirs or theirs. I think we'll be the ones that get a huge advantage in being able to just grow faster and more scalably.
Awesome. Did you say containerization, Kubernetes? Got it.
Well, I didn't, but maybe I should have. Sorry.
If we're hitting buzzwords, but thank you so much for that. I see Dean's popping back on here. We're coming up on the end. Thank you both so much, and this has just been great for me. I hope folks in the audience have been enjoying too. And I'll hand it off to Dean and close us out.
I'm just going to say, holy shit, that was rich. Seriously, Rick, Mahe, Ian. I feel like we just got like the insider view of like, three experts just having a conversation, which is what this is meant to be. And the depth of kind of how you shared about your own paths as companies is really, really helpful. And, listen, you had seriously accomplished peers on the line here, in addition to less experienced folks. And what you just provided in the depth of background was incredibly helpful. So thank you. Really appreciate it. We are going to jump to Remo for anybody that wants to join for networking. You're going to see that link right now in the chat box. But let me also just call out once again our partnership with ACG. For the past 3 years, and this is no surprise to anybody on this call, but 10 years ago, private equity really didn't focus too much on tech, right? There's like a handful of companies. Now it's the opposite, right? It'd be the exception if the private equity firm did not focus on tech. And so we've been partnering for the past 3 years with ACG, and they launched a conference, the SaaS and Tech Enabled Conference. Candidly, last year, it was March 11th. It was the last thing we did in person. And we had a couple hundred people from actually around the country in Philly before we were all locked down. This year it's virtual. We had a couple sessions yesterday. The last session is going to be today. It's on exits. So as you all know, you got to raise the money, but then you ultimately need to exit the company. And they've got a great panel lined up at 12:30 today. You're going to all get an email. And if anybody dropped off of this call, they will get an email too for that link at 12:30 lunchtime session. You got Chuck Berniker, CEO South Mountain, who's done both M&A as well as SPACs. Christian Clifford from Raymond James, Andrew Herning from Bill Trust, and Chris Miller from Troutman Pepper. And I think it'll be a really interesting conversation, obviously the SPAC conversation, but also just generally M&A and PE as an exit opportunity. So please join us for that session. It's complementary to your involvement with PACT. We want to obviously see a really good showing there. Again, 12:30 today for a quick exit strategy session. With that, thanks again, once again, Rick, Mahe, Ian, to all of our sponsors. Thank you. And for all that you're doing out there, not just to elevate your companies, but also this region.